A lot of people ask me what sustainable finance is, and the way I try and answer it is this way. Right now, the world is emitting 51 billion tons of carbon into the atmosphere every year. By 2050, British Columbia, Canada, and most nations have committed to getting to net zero. So from 51 billion tons of carbon to 0 tons of carbon in 30 years. For us to get to net zero by 2050, we are going to have to invest hundreds of billions of dollars, trillions of dollars into building or rebuilding our infrastructure to eliminate the carbon emissions that we are emitting now in energy, in transportation, and in the built environment. Closer to home in BC, we are emitting 67 million tons of carbon in the last year that they have calculated, and that's 2018. British Columbia has committed, and they committed about 20 years ago, to being at 40% below their 2007 emissions by 2030. And if you've done the math, 2030 is only 9 years away. And we need to get to 40 million tons a year. So from 67 million down to 40 million in the next 9 years. So just to reach our commitments for 2030, for 2050, we want to get to net zero. And we don't have any big industrial polluters like coal-fired electricity, to shutter to get a quick win. One area of real opportunity in British Columbia is the built environment. And by that, I mean, commercial and industrial buildings, and even moving on to residential buildings. There are thousands of buildings all over British Columbia that will need to be retrofitted. These buildings from Victoria to Fort St. John will need to replace their oil and their diesel heat and replace them with electric heat pumps. They'll need to find energy efficiencies like better insulation and window glazing. They're going to have to install renewable energy like solar power or geothermal. And each building owner will have to decide how best to invest in their building for this purpose. They'll need an innovative financing solution to help them to reduce their carbon footprint. In our look for an innovative financing solution for this purpose, we found one that's working now in the United States. It's called PACE. PACE stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy, and allows buildings to fund 100% of the upfront costs of these retrofits. Long-term, low-cost financing over the life of the improvement that they are putting into the building, and it's paid for through an extra tab on their property taxes. Many commercial industrial buildings have tenants who pay the property taxes, so we are essentially not having the building owner finance it, but rather the tenant in the building finance it. And what's interesting about it, of course, is that once you do the retrofit, the utility and energy bills usually drop. And so the financing turns into a net zero or even a positive impact to the tenant because they are paying a little bit more property tax, but their energy costs have dropped.
And Clark, so, as we go through this, since we're the only ones that are able to talk, we've sort of held back on all of our audience here. Let's have a conversation as we go.
Sure.
And so, one thing I would make sure we point out is that, well, when we say the tenants might pay for it, the key there is that we're aligning whoever pays for it with whoever gets the benefit. So the only time that the tenants would be paying for it is when they are also paying for the utilities, and therefore would get the benefit of the reduced utilities along with the increased property tax payments. So their rent actually wouldn't change if it's done right.
Right. So I was just about to introduce you, John. So let me just say that John Kinney is a PACE pioneer. He's the founder of the first commercial PACE company called CleanFund that was started in 2009. And CleanFund was instrumental in passing state legislation and originated over $200 million in PACE assets. He left CleanFund in 2019 and started Sea Change Partners. And he's on the board of PACE Nation, which is an advocacy organization for PACE. He lives in San Francisco, at least for now, John.
Right.
And I was reading your resume and I saw you were a professional skateboarder. So
Yeah.
is that a good job? Because my son's looking for a job.
It's a pretty great job in high school. I'll tell you that. It was a really fun thing to be able to gallivant. I focused on the East Bloc, actually. So I was in Russia and Czechoslovakia and East Germany in the mid 70s.
Wow, that's great. Well, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate you being here. So to start things off, I'll ask you a few questions, and then if any of you have questions, please forward them to us, to Kit, who's on the line, and we will try to answer them at the end. We will do our best. So, John, I know you spoke earlier about Berkeley just before the event started. Maybe you could just give us a brief how PACE got started in the United States.
Yeah, well, it started in Berkeley, California, and it was the result of Berkeley trying to figure out how to make it easier for their residents, focused initially on residential improvements, how to get them to be able to do solar and do more insulation and energy efficiency. Initially the Town Council of Berkeley passed this resolution that just allowed their residents to voluntarily sign an agreement with the city to increase their property taxes by the amount that would pay back for a solar installation. So if a house is going to do $10,000 of solar, that might be paid back over 20 years or 30 years at a certain interest rate. And the idea was that they wanted to be able to structure it in a way that would attract private capital, because while they wanted to get everyone to use solar, they didn't have the pocketbook to pay for it with public money. So they wanted to figure out, well, how do we structure this? You know, do we do a guarantee? What do we do to get affordable capital from private sources to pay for these improvements? And the innovation they came up with was PACE. That was back in 2007.
So we got a building owner that borrows the money, a private lender that lends the money, and it's attached to the property through municipal property tax.
Yeah, essentially what we're doing, it's sort of it's a public-private partnership. So this is a municipality setting up a PACE program and agreeing to increase levy, bill and collect an additional property tax from I'll focus my discussion on commercial. This can be used for residential in some places, but has some issues attached to that. So if a commercial building owner is going to need $1 million of improvements to replace their air conditioning system to be more efficient, they got a 20-year-old air conditioning system, they can take that $1 million, but they would take it from, for example, Vancouver. If Vancouver had a PACE program, that money would come from Vancouver, and they would agree to increase their property taxes by, let's say, $70,000 a year to pay back that $1 million over the next 30 years. But Vancouver doesn't have to come up with the money, because in this public-private partnership, a capital provider will put the $1 million up and then is entitled to the stream of income off of that line item on the property tax bill. It can be evidenced either as a micro bond or simply the assignment of that assessment contract between the owner and the municipality.
So who would the lenders be? Is there really a market for this type of financial product?
Absolutely, there is. I mean, if you think about property taxes, wind up there's good and bad about private property taxes for the you called it a lender. I call it a capital provider, because this isn't really debt. from the capital provider. What we're doing is we're essentially buying a bond that we're writing ourselves. But the advantage to the capital provider is that the property tax stream is not financing the owner of the real estate. It is financing the real estate. This is land secured financing. So from our standpoint, as a capital provider, we're going to be in a position pari passu with other property taxes, and the municipality is going to be the servicer of this and collect it for us. And our obligation is not extinguished in a foreclosure sale. So even if the senior mortgage holder forecloses on this property, future property taxes are still going to be owed. And this is one of those future property taxes. And so it makes it much more attractive for the capital provider to finance in this way. And for that reason, it's going to attract a lot of private capital, and has in the U.S.
Right. Tell me about Sea Change, the company that you now run. Where did you get the name?
Well, it's the letter C, not ocean, but the letter C dash change, and it, C is the atomic symbol for carbon. It's the culprit behind climate change. So it's also climate change. But I liked the confusion associated with a sea change, because we really do have, you were talking about the numbers here. They're staggering, the amount of improvements that we have to do. There are going to be a number of innovations that have to take place, both in the technology side for how we produce and conserve energy, but also in the financing side, in how we pay for this and match the payment to the actual improvement, and be sure that the person who is getting the savings is actually paying for it. So I wanted to see a sea change in the way PACE is used. Sea change is different than CleanFund, because CleanFund is a very well-established capital provider for PACE. And what Sea Change is doing differently is that we're working with senior lenders to help them put together their own PACE program, because I believe over time, that's where we get the real sea change. That's where we get the huge number of transactions, when lenders can help upgrade their entire portfolio rather than reaching out one at a time to real estate owners.
So I can see why the province would want this, because they get to reduce the BC carbon footprint without any real cost to the taxpayer. And I can see the lender, or not a capital provider, getting a long-term return on their investment secured by the property. I can see why the builder would want to finance 100% of this over a long-term period, over the life of the asset that they're putting on their property. What's in it for the municipality?
It's definitely a win-win for the municipalities, because they have this goal of improving the environment. But PACE is as much as it is an environmental improvement, it's also an economic development tool, because we're creating new projects that are accelerating projects that might happen eventually, but we're moving them up in time frame by making the financing attractive and available. So the municipalities get the permits, they permit bills, they get all of the employment from the construction. The property values increase when they have more efficient buildings. It's not just the efficiency that is improved, it's the comfort and the safety. Before the pandemic, we really focused HVAC. We focused on the H, the A, and the C. Now we're doing a lot of V. We're paying for new ventilation systems. So it's creating a safety goal there as well. So think it's a huge win-win for the municipality.
So what needs to happen for PACE to get started in British Columbia, do you think? Or anywhere? How does it start?
Clark, it really has to start first with education, like what AdvantageBC is doing here, in not just making the municipalities and legislators of it, aware of it, but also the building owners and the contractors that can use this as a way to help encourage people to put things in, and the lenders. The lenders, it's vital for lenders to understand this, because they have to decide whether to consent to each PACE transaction or do it themselves. And so that's the first place that we have to make changes. But I think the key thing is, and I think it was Bruce Flexman or someone was asking this question, is that we need the legislation to be in place and done in such a way that it will attract good private capital. So there's a lobbying role to get the legislation passed, and then to get each municipality that has to adopt the legislation essentially at the local level to agree to a PACE program. And it is important, and maybe a role for AdvantageBC or someone to play, to have some third-party validation of each transaction, so that the program isn't taking advantage of the tax system. So a number of different moving parts, and I know you and I know Vancouver and other people have been working on this for some time. So I think we're getting to a tipping point where it's going to be able to happen there.
It feels like a tipping point. We seem to be getting close. It's certainly something that's on the radar, and we're very excited about the opportunities. So we've talked about the building owners, the capital providers, the municipalities. Who else would benefit from PACE financing, do you think?
Well, I think it goes without saying that an improvement in the environment is going to not just help locals, but is going to help everyone. I know from the pandemic has taught us that we must think globally and act locally, and so this is one of those situations where every geography needs to come up with ways to improve the environment, and this is a public-private partnership that is pretty much a win-win all the way around. And so I think it's going to benefit everyone. And just the economic development, again, is a key thing here, I think.
So I understand in the States, there's PACE is also available for not just for commercial properties, but for residential properties as well. Are there any particular concerns about the PACE program moving into residential buildings?
Well, the big concern about residential PACE is with regards to consumer protection. When you have smaller contractors selling a new waterless water heater, or HVAC, or solar, they're selling to pretty unsophisticated borrowers who may or may not do multiple bids, and may or may not even speak the same language as the contractors who are explaining PACE. And so there's just a danger in giving contractors a financing tool that that is for people to buy from them. And there's going to be a very small number of situations where there's going to be a contractor take advantage of a homeowner, and homes are not sold on a multiple of cash flow. So you can envision a homeowner doing this because they just want to support the environment, not really understanding that creating the additional property taxes has to be explained to the next buyer of their home and things like that. On the commercial side, you have it's buyer beware kind of. It's, you know, you got more sophisticated contractors, you got more sophisticated owners. The transactions are large enough, and also commercial mortgages generally say that you won't create any liability voluntarily in front of the senior lender, and so it brings the lender to the table as having to oversee the transaction and approve it. On the residential side, most home mortgages don't prohibit the owner from adding additional debt, and so it doesn't have that same oversight. That's why I think starting with commercial makes sense. And as we get better and better at figuring out this residential side, we'll expand into that.
So start with commercial, industrial, then move into residential as you get your feet wet.
Certainly wouldn't
get your nose in the tent. Yeah.
Prohibit that, but I think, you know, California and Florida in particular are working hard to figure out how to get the consumer protection right.
Right, because I guess there could be unscrupulous contractors who say, I can put solar panels on your roof and it won't cost you a cent.
Yeah, the government will pay for it. It's going to be paid for with taxes.
Right. It's your taxes. It's being paid for.
Oh, forgot to mention that.
Yeah, that little piece. That's right. So one other party I hadn't thought about is the property's existing lenders, the company that has a first mortgage on the property. Should they be worried about PACE financing?
Well, it's important to recognize that they have a choice. First of all, they can either approve or deny a PACE lien on a property. So they have a seat at the table, and they generally, if they are able to spend the time and understand it, if the improvement in utilities is more than the increase in property taxes, the net operating income from that property is going to go up, and therefore the value of the property is going to go up. So it puts them in a better position. But they would still be concerned if it were not for the fact that PACE can never accelerate. So that's a really important thing for the senior lenders to get their head around, is that this is just another assessment financing. It's a special tax, and if
it's a fixed amount every year, and if you don't pay it 1 year, it doesn't mean the whole thing comes due and payable.
It never accelerates. There's no intercreditor agreement. There's no acceleration clause. This is a silent lender to a mortgage holder's property. And typically what I recommend is that I recommend the mortgage holder actually impound property taxes on a monthly basis, and they're the ones that then will be paying the property tax along with any other thing that they might be impounding, like insurance, because they want to know that those property taxes stay current, and they're allowed to do that as part of their acknowledging it. And again, once they get aware of this new way of financing, I think many senior lenders are going to start doing it themselves, and rather than saying yes or no to an outside capital provider, I think they'll come up with their own PACE program to upgrade their own portfolio and take the full ESG credit for what's happening.
Well, every bank and every credit union I come across now are putting out announcements about getting to net zero themselves by 2030. And this would be a fantastic opportunity to reduce the amount of carbon in their portfolio.
Yeah, I'd love seeing Jamie Dimon say that JP Morgan is going to do $2 trillion of lending for energy improvements. It's just, it's that kind of staggering scale that we have to get to, and why something that is systematic to align interests and just make it easier for real estate owners to borrow makes so much sense.
That's great. Now, I know that, or I hear that PACE is in 36 states in the United States, but that it's really only operating in 24 of those states. Is there any advice you can give us about what works or what doesn't work in the United States?
Well, that is a good signal to the legislators as to how important it is to get it right. If you make it too simple, then the rating agencies for this capital have trouble verifying that the PACE transaction is in fact a property tax and it meets all the items. And so people will be nervous about putting too much of their capital into that particular program. What is more common is that the government is with good intentions goes a little too far and makes it very difficult to get these things done. And I'm really it's unfortunate when you see fees being added. And if you create a financing that is going to cost 3% upfront to get done, it really makes the real estate owners think twice about that. And so it's very important to get the right balance here, to make it clear that this is validated and is in fact a property tax, just like a special tax along with anything else, but also not create layers of cost like energy audits that might not be really necessary to do an improvement, and other bells and whistles that a municipality might want, but man, just please keep it simple when you do it, because it just makes it so difficult for capital providers when they have to follow different rules in different provinces, and sometimes even in different cities. That really can strangle a program.
Okay, John, I'm putting you on the spot. Remember, only Canadians are here. So what's the gold standard in the United States on the PACE program? Which state works the best? Or give me the top three.
I think California probably works the best, but I will tell you that we didn't initially get it right. We've had to do, I think, 5 different bills in California because we wanted to allow for power purchase agreements. We wanted to be able to allow for some other safety measures, resiliency, like seismic improvements in California, or weatherization in Florida. I think Colorado does a pretty good job of it, and they were an early adopter as well. There are good signs that Connecticut has done an exceptional job of it at a great cost. They really invested in the Connecticut Green Bank right, starting this, and they subsidized early transactions and created a marketing program and spent a lot of money to get it going. But gosh, CleanFund, I think we had 50 different projects in Connecticut, a little tiny state.
I heard that they put in 200 million in PACE funding last year alone. I just saw a news release on that.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. I mean, that and by put in, I would say that's all private capital now. So right, they've attracted $200 million through the Connecticut Green Bank for projects, and it's making a huge difference there. So 3 C's: California, Colorado, and Connecticut. That's great. I guess, yeah, I guess that's right. Kit, you got any questions for us? A number of states have done a good job of it. Yeah, that's great. Kit?
Absolutely, Clark. Got plenty. So off the hop, from Carmen Rempel, John, when looking at the U.S. states, what type of retrofit work is the most common that you've seen to date with the PACE program? And I'd add on, how has that transformed over the last 15 years as there's been more states bringing it on board?
Well, initially, it was primarily focused on renewable energy, on solar. I think energy efficiency has overtaken that. And the largest use of energy in a building is the HVAC system. So the heating, ventilating, and air conditioning is, I think, the largest improvement that's financed by PACE. And that is going to, that's more than 50% of the building's energy use. And a 20-year-old system with new, that complies with new codes and has all the bells and whistles that you can get now, can reduce a building's utilities by 40%, 50% sometimes. A third is really pretty easy. Lighting is the other improvement that is just radical. It's so easy. They all, when you go to good lighting, it always is going to be paying for itself, especially when you can finance it over a long term. So whenever someone does lighting, I always want to make sure that they're not just doing that measure, that they're doing it with other things, because it is a no-brainer to do the lighting, but it's harder to be interfering with tenants and doing insulation and things that are just more intrusive. I think we're going to see storage is going to be a big one as the technology there improves, but it's still relatively expensive to do good storage.
That's great. Kit?
Yeah, so building out of that and kind of going in a bit of a different direction. So one of the questions that we have from our chair, Bruce Flexman, because of the fact that British Columbia already has higher than 98% clean power for grid
with your
power,
hydro.
Yeah. Where do you think the opportunities lie for us to be able to move forward on some of those other disaster resiliency, other improvements that allow for change?
Well, when you do air conditioning, lighting, insulation, building automation, yes, you get a reduction in utility usage, but you also get a increase in safety, in comfort, in efficiency. One of the really interesting transactions we did was on a laundromat, and the owner was very meticulous about efficiency, not of the building, but of the people that were doing all the laundry folding and things like that. And they noticed that after they did the energy improvement, which was able to pay for itself with pretty easily with just better lighting, but what they were surprised at is that the efficiency of the people was so much better. And so if you can improve the efficiency within a building and the comfort, that is an economic development tool as well.
If I can just jump in there for a second, the BC government put out a report in March, so 2 months ago, about their commitment to getting to 40% below their carbon footprint by 2030. And 60% of that reduction is going to come from the built environment in their estimation.
Yeah.
So because we're at 97% renewable energy. We don't have coal-fired plants. We don't have natural gas-fired electricity plants.
Yeah.
So if we can just convert our buildings from oil or from diesel or from bunker fuel to electricity, heat pumps, geothermal, you're cutting down on carbon so much already.
Yeah, I don't know
going from one to the other.
I don't know what the statistics are in Canada, but in the US, I think it's about 40% of our energy use comes from the built environment, from buildings using electricity, and whether that's from coal or clean hydro already, I'm not sure, but we need to get, if we're going to reach that goal, we need to be much more efficient with this, and the fact that it makes for economic development is an added benefit, I think. But this is an infrastructure that has to be done. And so, paying for the charging stations and paying for all the rest of the things that come with a clean economy is part of the improvement that has to be done to rebuild the infrastructure.
So, John, that speaks to one of the questions that we've got from Chris Duggan, one of our board members, asking about whether you have any knowledge of or experience with using clean financing. And I'll kind of merge two questions that we have here. One, using PACE in Europe specifically, and then out of that, it would be great to hear a little bit about that charging infrastructure and everything else, and how PACE might be used for new build as well.
Yeah, well, there's several different questions there. Let me address the EU question first. I mean, PACE is starting to emerge in, I got back recently from Barcelona because it's starting in Spain. I'm on conference calls with England. One of Boris's senior people is tasked with figuring out how to bring this to Great Britain. Ireland is looking at it. So it's starting in Europe. It's also already in Australia. They're looking at doing it in New Zealand. South Africa is looking at it. PACE Nation is right now considering whether we should become PACE nations, because we have invested so much in figuring this out in the U.S. and we think that we can learn from and teach other countries how to take advantage of this type of financing. So we're actively trying to recruit this on a global basis now that we've got some track record in using it locally and take advantage of the learning we've had.
And I think that point about South Africa, we've seen over the last 20 years, a lot of African states leapfrog technology in North America and Europe with self-power adoption and everything else. So going to that point about new building, would PACE be something that could potentially be used for commercial build out of those social and environmental amenities? We have a specific question in the Q&A asking about, could it be used for something like financing tech on community centers or libraries and things like that, and putting in solar and other higher cost alternative energy?
Well, I kind of hear two questions in that. One is, can it be used on new construction? And then one, can it be used on new technology? With the new construction, that is based on what the province wants. In about half of the states in the U.S., we can do it on new construction, and the rationale for that, because it's going to be hard to say, well, if you're building a new building, how does that air conditioning system, why is that an improvement over something that wasn't air conditioned before? But I think that in general, the codes that we're building in, the controls that we're setting at the legislative level are getting harder and harder to meet. And so this is essentially a way to help the building owners to meet that higher standard. In some states, they put a further requirement on that it must exceed code. But again, that is part of the strangulation of well, how do you measure that? Because it's somewhat difficult, and as you start layering in the engineering reports and things like that.
Right.
I really prefer when this can be used just to, let's increase the codes and make it more restrictive, and make this a possibility for people to be able to do it.
So there's, fortunately for us, Canada has a pretty effective model for this. We've got the Canadian Building Code Standards.
Yep.
And British Columbia uses what's called the STEP code. And Steve Thompson in our chat's bringing up steps 2, steps 3. So there could potentially be a methodology for us to look at where
it's already built in.
Baseline code is met.
Yep. And I see that happening effectively in other places. The other part of this question was about new technology. And I really like that this is essentially putting the burden of analysis on new technology on the commercial real estate owner to decide, is this new storage technology, is this new building management system far enough along for me to be able to invest in it over 30 years, rather than having it fall on a loan for that particular improvement. And you almost have to go with equity if you're doing something that's new, and the cost, therefore, and the repayment period just makes it very difficult to make sense. So PACE can be used for new technology as long as the province doesn't say that it must be for a proven technology that meets A, B, and C. And it's just, again, this is the real estate owner is making the risk assessment. They're going to owe it whether it works or doesn't work. But I think that's the right place to place that analysis.
So we've got actually a question on that from earlier on in the chat with Ross McDonald, one of our board members, asking on the financing side. So is there a means for, he says PACE facility, but for the PACE loan on a project to be terminated prior to maturity? So for instance, if someone does do one of those builds, one of those financings, if they demo the building, does the loan end up getting terminated?
The loan is to the land. So even if the building is terminated, the ongoing property tax payment is still going to be owed. And you can pay it off. So you can extinguish the PACE transaction by paying
voluntarily.
it voluntarily. And typically there's a step down in prepayment premiums associated with that. But those are all part of the rate structure that's created by private capital providers coming in. What I typically do is I say, look, if you don't want a prepayment premium, then the rate's going to be higher, and you can decide. For a lower rate, we'd have prepayment penalties associated to essentially give us a built-in return over time, and those typically go, they're at 1% within the first 10 years, almost always, and usually sooner than that. What I find, just as an FYI, is that everyone wants the ability to pay these off. Everyone wants the ability to refinance, and if the new lender doesn't want PACE, they want to be able to pay it off, and that's understandable. But it doesn't actually happen that often, because if you've got this long-term fixed rate financing that has no covenants, it's oftentimes seen as seller financing, and if it is ever passed through to the tenants who are getting the utility benefits, it's like cocaine for the real estate owner. They don't want to pay it off and just give their tenants the benefit of the improved utilities and not charge them anything for it.
So not to shift fully away from the heart of this conversation, but on the other side of the ledger, and we've got a question in the Q&A on this, because of, again, the clean grid, our two main drivers for emissions are built environment and the transportation network. So one of the questions that we have from Chris Duggan is on that side of things. Do you have any experience with any US states or anywhere else that's using PACE financing to help do fleet retrofit for shipping, cabs, things like that?
It's not using PACE per se. You can do a municipal bond to finance that. The issue becomes, well, what do you secure that with? And PACE, the assessment financing, is land secured financing, and is trying to create a very credit-worthy asset class that will have the price of PACE go down. Right now, it's actually higher than the mortgage, even though you could say that this creates a lien that's in priority to the mortgage. So it's a great risk reward, and that's part of why a lot of capital providers are eager to do this and why I believe lenders themselves are going to start to do it themselves. But if you just do it as a fleet retrofit, you have to think about what is the actual collateral associated with that.
Shifting to kind of the top of the conversation, looking at the way in which this has been successful in the United States, what's your recommendation for how the initial financing on things go? Should government be entering the market with a supportive fund on this, or should it be something where the infrastructure is established and the capital providers are the ones who put together the initial funding?
Yeah. Well, we saw it was effectively done in California and in Connecticut, where some counties took on this themselves and used their own funding to do it. But that tends to then delay the private capital that doesn't want to necessarily compete against the public capital. I believe we've already gone down that road enough to bypass that. And the capital that I would like to see municipalities put up would be perhaps as a rate buy down to still attract the private capital and just make it that much more attractive to the real estate owners on initial transactions. The buy down might not have to be on the interest rate if there is funding to pay the transaction costs associated with the early deals and to pay for the PACE administrator, there's going to be a requirement that there be some third party involved to help make this streamlined and give the municipalities confidence that they're not going to be caught in the middle of having to figure out how to resolve disputes or approve transactions. That's not what they do. They want to just have it be clear. And so having paying for a third-party administrator, paying for the transaction costs early on, and then perhaps paying for some public awareness are the places where I think the local municipality dollars are going to be most leveraged and most likely to result in the kind of education and attracting private capital in quickly.
Sure. Kit, say two more questions.
Yeah, for sure. And building off of that, a further question is, do you see any avenue by which doing this solely with public dollars would make any sense?
Well, I think it does, but it is kind of missing the ability to have the checks and balances associated with having private capital providers come in. Oftentimes, you'll wind up in doing that, getting the easy wins done. I mean, I'd really like to. I think to create the sea change that I want to see happen, you can do that in addition to having the private capital be involved, but do it in a way where you're not competing against the private capital, so that you don't somehow keep others from coming in. And building owners like to have several bids, and they at least in the U.S. they'd really rather not be having to deal with the government. That just seems like a hassle for people. It's not my preference, but I can see it being a decent alternative. And in fact, it did help in Connecticut and other. I've seen it happen in a lot of places where government puts up money and makes transactions happen.
Particularly the first few, to kind of get the ball rolling and get people understanding how it works and get people experience and get the greases flowing.
Yep. It would just be a shame to have that not be leveraged by bringing in capital providers and educating people in the process.
Right. I mean, in my view, the government is already stretched dealing with the pandemic. They don't really have hundreds of millions of dollars to put into other projects this time. So utilizing the private capital might be a better way of going.
And then speaking to the leverage, John, we've got a question on what is the typical credit risk rating of doing the PACE financing?
Well, this is typically a 20%. I call it LI, LTV with a small I in there. It's a lean to value because it's not really a loan, but it's 20% of the value of property might be on PACE. And I think as lenders start to do this themselves, it might be closer to 10%. And when you go and get this rated, it's pretty easy to get, as long as the legislation is rateable and that there's evidence through a legal opinion or some other way that this was done in conformity with that legislation. The credit on this is bomb-proof, and you're going to get an investment grade rating, and that's going to drive down the cost. I think insurance companies in the U.S. are buying PACE bonds right now for 4%. They're being issued at higher than that, but it's going to drive the cost of PACE down over time. So from a risk weighting standpoint, insurance companies can typically get an NAIC 1 on this that is the best treatment and put it on their Schedule D balance sheet for the most efficient capital treatment.
Okay. Clark, I'm going to cheat. And John, if you can give me a quick yes or no and then a descriptor. But last question here, because we actually have 5 more that have just rolled in. Do you have any experience with power providers, transmission companies, groups like that using PACE for financing, like the Tennessee Valley Authority or private stateside?
Yes, Tennessee Valley Authority is one. I mean, Ohio Port Authority has used it, so it does happen.
Okay,
that's great. Well, thank you all for joining us today. I really appreciate everyone's interest. John, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate your experience. If anyone's interested and wants to learn more, please feel free to contact us or check out John's organization's website, pacenation.org. We're hoping to change it to pacenations.org shortly. Because, in order to have an international organization, you have to, invite other countries, John. You can't have a World Series without inviting the world.
Well, I'm very happy that our neighbors are already doing such a great job with their clean energy, and so it's wonderful to see you guys also embarking on this additional step that I think is going to be an important part of the whole picture.
That's great. And let's keep the conversation going. Talk to your friends. Convince your colleagues. Wake up your partner in the middle of the night and get excited about this. Call your MLAs and have a great day. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Clark. Thanks very much to AdvantageBC.